Blood struck the marble floor before Luca reached the forbidden door. He crossed the west corridor without slowing, one hand hidden beneath his charcoal overcoat, while his polished shoes left dark, uneven prints behind him. The mansion smelled of cedar smoke and furniture wax. Beyond the tall windows, tires hissed over wet gravel as the last armored car pulled away. Elena stood beside a silver service cart, holding a pot of untouched coffee. Luca's face looked carved from pale stone, but the muscle in his jaw jumped with every breath. Mr. Moretti? His eyes cut toward her. Cold. Focused. A warning without volume. No one enters my study tonight. Two guards followed several feet behind him. Neither dared mention the tremor in his left hand. Luca opened the black walnut door, stepped inside, and locked it behind him. The bolt landed with a hard metallic click. Elena looked down. A single red drop gleamed beside the toe of her sensible black shoe. Then another struck the floor closer to the study. One of the guards wiped it away with a folded handkerchief. You saw nothing, he said. I saw that he needs a doctor. The doctor has been dismissed. His answer came too quickly. He positioned himself before the door, shoulders squared beneath his suit. Mr. Moretti gave an order. Elena wrapped both hands around the coffee pot until its heat bit into her palms. In 11 months at the estate, she had learned which rules kept employees paid and which ones kept them alive. Never use the east staircase after midnight. Never repeat a name overheard in the dining room. And never enter Luca Moretti's study unless summoned. The previous maid who had opened that door without permission had been gone before breakfast. No explanation. No second chance. A dull impact sounded from inside. Not a gunshot. Something heavier and softer. A body or a chair hitting wood. The guard's gaze shifted toward the door, then away. He said no one. Elena placed the coffee pot on the cart. Porcelain rattled against silver in the sudden silence. And if he cannot change that order, go downstairs. Open the door. The guard stared at her, as if the maid's uniform had spoken instead of the woman wearing it. Firelight flickered beneath the threshold, orange against the black floor. No shadow moved beyond it. No footsteps crossed the carpet. Only the faint pop of burning logs came through the wood. Elena reached for the handle. The guard caught her wrist before her fingers touched brass. His grip was firm, his voice lower. Walk away, Elena. You can lose your job for this. The key ring at his belt brushed the edge of her apron. She looked at it, then at him. And what does he lose if I obey? The question held him still for one breath. It was enough. Elena twisted free, pulled the study key from his ring, and pushed it into the lock. Metal scraped metal. The guard could have stopped her again. Instead, his hand remained suspended between them as the bolt turned. Warm air rolled from the room, carrying the smell of smoke, leather, and something sharp beneath both. Luca's desk lamp burned over closed ledgers and a glass of amber liquor. Heavy curtains sealed the windows. Near the fireplace, an overturned chair rested on its side, one leg slowly spinning to a stop. Luca lay against the stone hearth. His overcoat had fallen open, revealing a white shirt darkened along his ribs. One hand still held a pistol pointed toward the floor. The other was pressed weakly against his side. Close that door, he murmured. Elena stepped inside. Behind her, the guards exchanged a glance but did not cross the threshold. Luca tried to rise. His elbows slipped on the wool rug, and the pistol struck the marble with a clean, terrible sound. His eyes found Elena's, furious not because she had seen blood, but because she had seen him unable to stand. I gave you an order. She kicked the weapon beyond his reach, shut the door on the guards, and turned the lock herself. That choice had just placed her job, her home, and the money her family depended on outside the room. Inside, Luca's breathing shortened as the fire painted gold across his colorless face. Elena dropped to her knees beside the most feared man in the city and pulled open his ruined coat. Whatever had happened on the road, he had hidden it from his own household. Now his eyes were losing focus, and she was the only person he had not permitted to be there. Mr. Moretti, she said, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse fluttered beneath them. Then his eyes closed. The fire snapped behind the iron grate, sending sparks against the soot-dark brick while cold rain whispered across the study windows. Beneath the smell of cedar smoke lingered something sharper: gunpowder, wet wool, and blood. 2 fists struck the locked door. Open this room. Elena ignored the guards. She tore a clean linen strip from the bottom of her apron, folded it into a thick pad, and pressed it against Luca's side. His pulse stumbled beneath her fingertips, too fast and too faint. "Mr. Moretti, open your eyes." Nothing. Elena leaned harder into the wound. The pressure drew a ragged breath from him, then a low curse. His eyelids lifted. For 1 second, the cold authority returned to his face. "Unlock the door. Not until the bleeding slows." That was not a request. "Neither is this. Keep your hand over mine." Luca's fingers closed around her wrist instead. Even weakened, his grip carried warning. No one corrected him in his own house. No one touched him without permission. Elena held his stare and did not pull away. "If you want to punish me, stay alive long enough to do it." The clock on the mantel counted 3 hard seconds. Then his hand released her wrist and settled over the linen. The choice was small, almost invisible, but the balance inside the room shifted. Luca Moretti obeyed. Elena dragged a leather footstool closer and raised his legs, then pulled a cushion beneath his shoulders. Her movements remained measured despite the pounding at the door. Every few minutes, she asked him a question, his name, the room, the hour, not because she doubted he knew, but because silence kept trying to take him. "Luca Moretti." His answer scraped through clenched teeth. "My study. And the hour? Late enough to fire you." "Then tell me again in 5 minutes." A humorless breath escaped him, but it was a breath. The rain thickened, drumming against the glass. Heat rolled from the fireplace, yet Luca's skin had turned cold beneath her palm. Elena removed her wool cardigan and laid it over him. Her uniform sleeves left her arms bare to the draft, and goose flesh rose along her skin. Still, she kept counting his breaths. At some point the fists outside stopped. The hallway fell silent, more threatening than the noise had been. Near midnight, Luca's eyes closed again. Elena touched his shoulder. "Stay with me." His body jerked beneath her hand. The study vanished from his face. His breathing became short and violent, his head turning as though avoiding blows no one else could see. One hand searched the rug for the pistol that was no longer there. "Down," he muttered. "Get down." Elena caught his reaching hand before it struck the marble hearth. "You're inside. The doors are locked. They're behind us. Listen to me." She guided his palm flat against the polished floor. "Feel the stone. Hear the rain. You are home." Another tremor passed through him. "Don't let them." The unfinished command broke into a gasp. Elena shifted closer so he could hear her over the fire. "No one is coming through that door tonight." Luca's eyes opened, but they did not recognize the room. They fixed on her voice instead. For years, men had survived by reacting when that voice gave an order. Now its owner followed hers. "Breathe in," Elena said. Slowly. He did. Again. The second breath lasted longer. The third no longer shook. Then his hand rose without warning and caught the fabric at her waist. Elena stiffened. Luca pulled her toward him with the blind strength of someone still trapped in a nightmare, and her palm landed against his chest. Beneath it, his heartbeat raced like boots across a corridor. She could have torn herself free. She could have called the guards and saved what remained of her position. Instead, she listened. "You're safe," she said, lowering her voice until it matched the rhythm she wanted from him. "Follow my breathing." Her own breaths slowed deliberately. Gradually, his followed. The fist twisted in her uniform loosened, though it did not let go. Elena stayed kneeling beside him, one hand maintaining pressure at his side, the other resting lightly over his sternum. Minutes passed. The fire sank to red embers, and the clock moved beyond 1, then 2. Luca's jaw unclenched. The deep line between his brows faded. For the first time in years, sleep reached him without gunfire, locked doors, or the weight of a weapon in his hand. Elena tried once to ease away. His breathing broke instantly, and his fingers tightened. So she remained, sacrificing the last safe distance between a servant and the man who owned the house. Exhaustion lowered her inch by inch until her cheek rested above his heartbeat. By the time pale morning light touched the rain-streaked windows, Luca was still asleep, and Elena no longer had the strength to move before he opened his eyes. Pale light slid across the rain-streaked windows, turning the study's mahogany walls the color of cold ash. Somewhere beyond the locked door, a floorboard creaked beneath a guard's polished shoe. Luca opened his eyes to the scent of dying embers, damp wool, and something unfamiliar in his own house. Warmth without threat. A gentle weight rested over his ribs. His right hand moved by instinct toward the pistol on the carpet, then stopped. Elena lay against his chest, her cheek rising and falling above his heartbeat. One hand still pressed the folded cloth to his side. The other was tangled in his shirt, gripping the black fabric as though even in sleep she refused to let him slip away. A loose strand of hair crossed her face. Her gray uniform was wrinkled from hours on the marble floor, and the skin beneath her eyes had darkened with exhaustion. Luca looked down at her hand. No one touched him without permission. Men had been dismissed for placing a hand on his shoulder. Enemies had learned that crossing the space around him carried consequences. Yet Elena had entered that space, issued orders, held him through a nightmare, and fallen asleep listening to the heart half the city believed he did not possess. A heavy knock struck the door. Elena stirred. Her fingers tightened once in his shirt, and Luca felt his breathing steady before he could resent the fact. "Boss," a guard called. "It's after 6. We heard movement." Luca's gaze remained on Elena. The old answer rose automatically. Come in, remove her, restore the rules. Those rules had built the silence surrounding him. They had also left him waking every night with a weapon in his hand. Another knock shook the brass handle. "Should we enter?" Moving slowly, Luca reached for the overcoat he had discarded near the hearth. Pain tightened his jaw as he lifted it, but he made no sound. The dark wool carried the sharp smell of rain and gun smoke. He spread it over Elena's shoulders, drawing the collar beneath her chin so the morning cold could not reach her. She breathed out softly and settled closer, unaware that the most feared man in the house had just wrapped her in the garment his guards recognized as a symbol of his authority. Luca watched her for one silent beat. Then he answered the door. No, the corridor went still. "Sir, the doctor is waiting," the guard said through the wood. "And the household will begin its duties in 10 minutes. Then the household will learn patience." Luca's voice was quiet, controlled, no louder than the rain dripping from the stone balcony. "No one enters this room." A pause followed. "What about the maid?" His eyes hardened, but not at the woman sleeping against him. "Especially not for her." The words carried through the oak. On the other side, shoes shifted against the runner. Luca could almost see the guards exchanging looks, trying to understand an order for which the mansion had no precedent. "She is to be awakened for the morning service," another man ventured. "If she is absent, the head housekeeper will. Elena is not to be touched." Each word landed with the finality of a lock turning. "Not questioned, not punished, not awakened. Anyone who disobeys answers to me." Silence consumed the corridor. Luca had issued orders concerning territory, debts, and men who had betrayed him. None had cost him this particular thing, the distance that made everyone fear him without ever knowing him. By sunrise, his guards would understand that a maid had crossed a boundary and survived. Worse, they would know Luca Moretti had protected her while she slept. Elena shifted beneath the coat. Her lashes fluttered, but her eyes stayed closed. Luca lowered his hand to keep the wool from slipping from her shoulder, careful not to wake her. Beyond the door, the first service bell rang through the mansion, bright and metallic. No footsteps answered it. For once, the entire house waited on the sleep of the woman it had trained to become invisible. Then a slower set of footsteps approached along the corridor. They stopped outside the study. Keys touched one another with a thin silver chime, the unmistakable sound of the head housekeeper arriving to enforce the morning order. Luca did not reach for his gun. He kept one hand over Elena's coat and looked directly at the door. "Let her try." Keys scraped against the lock with a thin metallic hiss. Then the study door opened 3 inches and stopped against the guard's boot. Cold corridor air slipped inside, carrying beeswax, coffee, and the faint starch of freshly pressed uniforms. The head housekeeper stared past the guard, first at Luca, pale beneath the amber firelight, then at Elena asleep against his chest, wrapped in the black overcoat no servant was permitted to touch. Her keys went still. "Close the door," Luca said. The guard obeyed, but not before the head housekeeper saw Luca steady the coat over Elena's shoulder with his own hand. By breakfast, silence had become rumor. It traveled through the mansion faster than the silver carts, through the kitchen's steam, along the servants' narrow staircase, beneath the clink of porcelain in the dining room. Elena woke to find Luca gone and the overcoat folded beside her. When she entered the service hall, conversations died one by one. A laundress removed her basket from the bench. A footman refused to meet her eyes. Even the cook placed Elena's cup at the far end of the table as though touching it might violate an order no one understood. Isolation cost more than whispers. It changed where she could sit, which doors opened, and whether anyone answered when she spoke. Elena tied her apron tighter and carried the breakfast tray upstairs alone. In the sunlit dining room, crystal glasses threw hard white shards across the linen. Luca sat at the head of the table, his wound hidden beneath a charcoal suit, one hand resting near untouched coffee. Beside him sat the woman chosen to secure his political alliance, immaculate in ivory silk, a diamond flashing at her throat. The head housekeeper stood near the wall. Her eyes settled on Elena's tray. "There she is," Luca's fiancé said. Her spoon touched the saucer with a delicate click. The maid who mistook an injured man for an invitation. Elena stopped beside the table. The silver coffee pot warmed her palm through her glove. No one moved to help her. "I entered because Mr. Moretti had collapsed," she said. "You entered a locked room after being forbidden." "Yes. And you were found lying on him." A smile crossed the woman's mouth, polished and bloodless. "Wearing his coat." Luca's fingers tightened once against the table, but Elena did not look toward him. She set the coffee pot down without spilling a drop. "I was keeping pressure on his wound. All night. Until the bleeding slowed." "How devoted." The woman lifted her napkin, then let it fall across the floor beside Elena's shoes. "Pick that up. Perhaps from your knees, since you seem comfortable earning favor there." The room changed temperature. The radiator ticked beneath the windows. Somewhere beyond the doors, a serving cart squeaked to a halt. Luca pushed his chair back, but Elena moved first. She removed her gloves, folded them beside the coffee pot, and left the napkin where it lay. "I did not ask for his coat," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that every person leaned into it. "I did not ask to be held. I did not ask anyone here to believe me. But if I had obeyed the rules you value so highly, Mr. Moretti would not be sitting at this table." The fiancé's smile vanished. "Remember your place." Elena met her eyes. "Last night, my place was beside a dying man because everyone with a higher place stayed outside the door." The head housekeeper lowered her gaze. A footman froze with his hand around a pitcher. Luca remained standing, but Elena gave him no opening to rescue her. She gathered her gloves and stepped back from the table on her own terms. "You may dismiss me," she said to the head housekeeper. "You may move me to another wing. You may make every servant in this house afraid to speak to me. But you will not turn what happened into shame because the truth embarrasses you." She walked out beneath the chandelier's cold brilliance, leaving the napkin untouched on the floor. Behind her, Luca's fiancé rose so sharply that her chair struck the marble. "If she remains in this house," she said, facing Luca, "our families will hear why." Luca looked through the open doorway where Elena had disappeared, then down at the coat she had returned, folded with impossible care. When he answered, his voice carried into the silent corridor. "Send Elena to my office at noon." The head housekeeper hesitated. "For punishment, sir?" Luca's gaze hardened. "For a private settlement." At noon, the brass hands of the grandfather clock met beneath a wash of pale winter light, and 12 measured chimes rolled through the mansion. The sound reached Elena as the head housekeeper escorted her to Luca's office, where cedar smoke mingled with the sharp scent of ink and leather. A guard opened the walnut door, waited until she crossed the threshold, then closed it behind her with a muted click. Luca stood at the window in a charcoal shirt, one hand resting near the bandage beneath it. His face had regained its controlled stillness, but the untouched glass of water beside him trembled faintly whenever his fingers touched the desk. "Sit." Elena remained standing. Between them lay a cream envelope, thick enough to carry more money than she could earn in years. Luca pushed it toward her. The paper whispered across polished mahogany. "There will be no punishment," he said. "Your position will remain secure. This is compensation for your discretion." Elena looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. "My discretion about what?" "The condition in which you found me." "You mean dying?" The fire shifted behind its iron grate. A log split with a dry crack, and Luca's jaw tightened. "I mean vulnerable." That word seemed to cost him more than the money. Elena moved closer to the desk. She could hear the rasp hidden beneath his breathing, could see where stiffness pulled at one shoulder whenever he turned. Yet the envelope reduced every hour beside the fireplace. the blood on her hands, his fist knotted in her dress, the first unguarded sleep he had known in years, to a transaction that could be sealed and forgotten. "If I take this," she said, "you can tell yourself you bought the night back." Luca's gaze cooled. "Everyone has a price." Elena slid the envelope toward him with one finger. "Then you have misjudged mine." For several seconds, only the clock's pendulum moved. Luca had watched armed men bargain for their lives and politicians trade loyalty for smaller sums. No one beneath his roof had ever returned his money untouched. "Name what you want," he said. Elena reached into her apron and placed a worn payroll slip beside the envelope. A name had been struck through in black ink 6 weeks earlier. Mr. Bellini's job. Luca's eyes dropped to the paper. The elderly cook had served the household for 27 years before being dismissed for missing imported wine from the kitchen inventory. He was caught stealing. No, he was accused of signing a delivery sheet he could no longer read. Elena opened the folded slip. Beneath the dismissal notation sat a thumbprint and a crooked mark where a signature should have been. His eyesight had failed. Someone placed the paper under his hand, then blamed him when the count came up short. "And you know this how?" "Because I read the inventory after everyone else left." Her voice stayed level. The missing cases were listed as received at 10:40 p.m. Mr. Bellini had already clocked out at 7. Luca studied the times. The office felt suddenly colder, despite the fire. Reinstating the cook would not cost him territory or blood, but it would require something his men had almost never seen him surrender: the appearance of infallibility. His signature stood at the bottom of the dismissal order. Elena had not come asking for mercy. She had placed his own mistake beneath the light and asked whether pride mattered more than an innocent man's livelihood. "You could have asked for your brother's medical expenses," Luca said. Her fingers tightened once against the rough seam of her apron. "That debt is mine. This one is yours." The words landed without volume and left no place for him to hide. Luca turned toward the intercom, then stopped with his hand above it. The hesitation lasted only a breath, but Elena saw it. He pressed the switch. "Send the head housekeeper to the kitchen. Mr. Bellini is to be reinstated today, with full back pay and a written correction in the household record." A startled silence answered through the speaker. "Sir, you heard me." "Yes, sir." Luca released the switch. The decision moved through the mansion faster than any rumor. Downstairs, pantry doors opened, footsteps crossed tile, and an old name returned to the duty board in fresh white chalk. Elena had entered the office as a servant expected to accept a settlement. She now stood before the most powerful man in the house, having forced him to correct his own injustice. Luca picked up the envelope and tore it once through the middle. Then again. The pieces fell into the wastebasket like pale leaves. "Your silence is not for sale," he said. "No, and neither is your respect." Elena met his eyes. "That depends on what you do when no one is watching." A muscle shifted along Luca's cheek. He crossed to the door and opened it himself. The head housekeeper stood outside, still holding the chalk used to restore Bellini's name. "Elena remains in this house under my protection," Luca said, his voice carrying down the corridor. "But she answers for herself. No one speaks in her place. Not even me." The head housekeeper lowered her eyes. Elena stepped into the corridor, then paused when Luca spoke again, quieter now. "Why Bellini?" The noon light caught the worn edge of her apron as she looked back. "Because kindness means nothing if it only protects the person standing closest to you." She walked away before he could reply. Behind her, Luca remained beside the open door, one hand pressed to the bandage under his shirt. On his desk, the payroll slip lay beside the empty space where his money had been. For the first time, Elena had not merely seen him without his armor. She had made him choose what kind of man would put it back on. And somewhere beyond the office windows, an engine started in the courtyard, then idled far longer than it should have. Rain ticked against the service wing windows, soft as fingernails on glass, while the engine in the courtyard kept its low mechanical growl. It did not belong to any Moretti vehicle. Elena recognized the dark sedan from the reflection in a silver serving tray. The same car had appeared outside the clinic where her younger brother received treatment, then again behind the market 3 days earlier. Now it waited less than 40 yards from Luca's office. A folded pharmacy receipt rested in her apron pocket, its paper warm from her hand. Someone had written a time across the back in blue ink. 8:30 tonight, followed by 4 words. Bring Moretti to the gate. The message had been slipped beneath her brother's medicine at the clinic. Not a threat against Elena. An instruction built around Luca's growing willingness to listen to her. The gentleness he had shown that morning had become a weapon in someone else's hand. Footsteps approached over the black and white marble. Elena folded the receipt into quarters just as the head housekeeper rounded the corner carrying a ring of brass keys. Mr. Bellini has been informed, the older woman said. He returns tomorrow with full back pay. For one brief second, Elena's grip loosened. One injustice had ended. That was enough. I need my final wages, Elena said. The keys stopped chiming. Your final, I'm resigning. Effective immediately, cold air moved through the corridor when the courtyard door opened. Beyond it, the sedan's windshield held only a pale reflection of the sky. The head housekeeper studied Elena's face, then the small receipt disappearing into her pocket. Mr. Moretti will want an explanation. Then tell him I valued Mr. Bellini's job more than my own. Elena climbed the narrow servant's staircase before questions could follow. Her room smelled of starch, lavender soap, and the damp wool of uniforms drying near the radiator. Everything she owned fit inside one scuffed suitcase. 2 dresses, a framed photograph of her brother, 3 letters from the clinic, and an envelope marked for his next month of treatment. She counted the bills once. Without her wages, they would not be enough. Her thumb rested over the clinic's stamped address. Then she placed the envelope inside the suitcase and closed the brass latch. A floorboard creaked behind her. Luca stood in the doorway, his dark shirt buttoned high over the bandage. Gray afternoon light cut across his face, sharpening the exhaustion beneath his eyes. You restored Bellini's name, Elena said before he could speak. Let that be the last thing you do because I asked. His gaze moved to the suitcase. Who frightened you? No one. Don't lie to me. The words carried his old steel, but his hand pressed briefly against his side. Elena crossed the room and placed her household keys on the dresser between them. The metal struck wood with a small, final click. The car outside is waiting for me to lead you somewhere, she said. It followed me to my brother's clinic. Whoever sent it knows you listened to me today. If I stay, they will keep using that. Luca's jaw tightened. Give me the message. If I give it to you, you'll follow it. I decide where I go. And today, I decide whether they get a road to you. She removed the maid's apron and folded it neatly beside the keys. The plain gray dress beneath it made her look less protected, not less resolute. Luca stepped aside from the doorway only after a long silence. You leave this house without security. You lose your wages, your room, and access to the physician I arranged for your brother. Elena's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. The clinic envelope inside contained barely half of what was needed. I know. Stay, he said, the command stripped from the word. I can contain this. You cannot contain a trap while its bait is living under your roof. For once, Luca Moretti had no order that could reach her without proving her right. Elena carried the suitcase downstairs. The servants watched from shadowed archways as the front doors opened onto wet stone and the smell of cedar after rain. The dark sedan pulled away the moment she stepped outside, its tires whispering across the flooded drive. It had what it wanted, proof that Elena had severed herself from Luca. Or so its unseen driver believed. At the iron gates, Elena surrendered her household pass to the guard and walked toward the public road without looking back. Behind the study windows, Luca remained motionless, one hand against the glass. By nightfall, Elena had lost her position, her shelter, and the money meant to keep her brother's treatment uninterrupted. But the path through her to Luca had been cut. What neither of them yet knew was whether the trap would close or turn toward the woman who had stepped beyond his protection. The fire in the study had burned down to a red seam beneath gray ash, leaving the room cold enough for Luca's breath to cloud the window. Near midnight, the head housekeeper entered carrying freshly pressed linens, their starch sharp against the lingering smells of cedar smoke and antiseptic. Luca stood beside the desk in yesterday's black shirt, Elena's resignation folded once beneath his palm. Strip the bed, he said. The head housekeeper hesitated. Sir, that room has already been cleaned. His gaze shifted toward the adjoining chamber where his blood-stained clothes had been removed after the ambush. Then clean it again. Cotton whispered across the mattress as she pulled away the fitted sheet. A small glass vial struck the hardwood, rolled through a bar of amber lamplight, and stopped against Luca's shoe. Dark fibers clung to the wax around its neck. He crouched without touching it. Under the mattress edge, hidden by the sheet's deep fold, lay a handkerchief stiff with dried antiseptic and a narrow strip torn from his bandage. One corner had turned an unnatural blue-black. Luca's voice lost all warmth. "Who changed these linens that morning?" "Elena refused to let anyone enter until you woke," the head housekeeper replied. "Afterward, she asked me to keep everything untouched. I thought she feared punishment." Luca lifted the handkerchief with silver fireplace tongs and carried it to the desk. Beside it, the housekeeper placed a crumpled inventory slip recovered from Elena's apron before her room had been cleared. 3 times had been written in the margin: 1:10 a.m., 2:05 a.m., 3:40 a.m. Each was followed by the same 2 words: breathing slowed. Beneath the final entry, Elena had pressed the pen so hard it had cut the paper. "Bandage darkens after contact. Not blood." Luca opened the medical cabinet and removed the sealed dressing supplied to him after the ambush. Its wrapping bore his private security mark, a black crest used only for materials inspected before reaching him. He held the fresh gauze near the stained strip. The same bitter almond odor rose faintly when warmth from the lamp touched both. That smell returned him to the floor beside the fire, not as a memory of weakness, but as a sequence Elena had understood while everyone else obeyed locked doors. Her fingers tearing away poisoned gauze, cold water striking a basin, her hand pressing clean cloth against his side whenever his pulse faltered, the quiet counting that he had mistaken for part of his nightmare. She had remained upright for hours, recording every change, until exhaustion folded her onto his chest only after his breathing steadied. The head housekeeper covered her mouth. She knew. She suspected, Luca said, studying the security crest. And she told no one because she didn't know whom she could trust. He crossed to the wall safe and drew out the access ledger. Only 4 people had authorization to inspect his field dressings. 2 had been outside the city. 1 had died months earlier, though his name remained on the old list. The final signature was clean, familiar, and repeated across years of Luca's most guarded movements. His chief advisor had approved the medical case, rerouted the household inventory, and signed the order dismissing Mr. Bellini after the missing wine created a convenient distraction. Luca set the ledger beside Elena's notes. Paper touched paper with a sound no louder than a card being dealt. The entire trap became simple. The poison dressing had weakened him after the ambush. Elena had interrupted the plan by entering the forbidden study. Later, the same trusted advisor had used her brother's clinic to drive her away before she could connect what she had seen. Luca reached for the telephone, then stopped. Calling his security staff would warn the man who controlled their assignments. Instead, Luca removed his signet ring and pressed it into warm sealing wax across the study doors. "No one enters," he told the head housekeeper. "No one learns what we found." "And Elena?" The muscles in Luca's jaw tightened as the grandfather clock struck 12, each note vibrating through the dark wood. He took the vial, the ledger, and Elena's handwritten observations, locking them inside a steel case chained to his wrist. Then he opened a private drawer and removed the original family council seal, the authority he had never used against his own inner circle. "Prepare the great hall for dawn," he said. "Every member of the family will attend." The head housekeeper stared at the seal in his hand. Luca looked toward the rain-black road beyond the gates, where Elena had walked away carrying the cost of a betrayal that belonged to his house. By sunrise, the man he had trusted most would have to answer before them all, and Luca would have to decide how much of his empire he was willing to burn to bring Elena back alive. At dawn, rain rattled against the stained glass windows while the last candles guttered in the great hall, filling the air with hot wax and damp wool. 40 members of the Moretti family sat beneath the painted ceiling when Luca entered with a steel case chained to his wrist. The head housekeeper closed the oak doors behind him. At the long table's right hand sat Luca's chief advisor, the woman promised to him by an alliance older than either of them, wearing white silk and the calm expression of someone certain the room belonged to her. "This council was called without my approval," she said. Luca set the original council seal on the black walnut table. Its impact was soft. "Final. Your approval is why we are here." He unlocked the case and laid out the vial, the poisoned gauze, Elena's handwritten pulse records, and copies of the medical authorization bearing his chief advisor's private code. No one moved as Luca traced the chain plainly. She had approved the compromised dressing, altered the household inventory to blame Mr. Bellini, and used Elena's younger brother's clinic to force Elena beyond the estate gates before she could speak. The chief advisor's chair scraped across stone. A maid's notes against an alliance controlling half your eastern territory? Not her notes alone. At Luca's signal, the head housekeeper distributed the security records and clinic payments. Paper whispered from hand to hand. The chief advisor looked toward the men seated behind her, but their eyes had already dropped to the evidence. If you disgrace me, she warned, my family closes every route east of the river. Warehouses, ports, protection agreements. You lose half your ground before noon. Luca removed the Moretti signet from his finger. In the blue morning light, the bare strip of skin looked paler than the rest of his hand. Then I lose it. A murmur rolled beneath the rafters. Luca broke the engagement seal in two and placed the pieces before her. The marriage alliance is dissolved. Effective now. Her composure cracked. You would cut your empire in half for a servant? Luca's gaze settled on Elena's cramped handwriting. Each line marking another hour, she had kept him breathing while his own house conspired against her. I am cutting away what made this house unworthy of her. He turned to the waiting authorities beyond the doors and surrendered the evidence. His chief advisor was escorted from the hall without ceremony, her heels striking the marble until the sound vanished into the rain. Telephones began ringing almost immediately. One captain reported an eastern checkpoint abandoned. Another confirmed that 3 warehouses had changed hands. Luca listened, then ordered his men not to retaliate. By sunrise, the red pins marking Moretti territory had been stripped from half the wall map. No one in the hall mistook the silence for victory. Luca had chosen justice, and justice had sent him the bill. Before the family could rise, he faced them with his unadorned hand resting on the table. Mr. Bellini's name remains cleared. Elena's wages and her brother's medical support continue whether she returns or not. Anyone who speaks of her as property leaves this house today. Then Luca walked out alone. The head housekeeper located Elena at a modest clinic 12 miles away, where antiseptic stung the nose and fluorescent lights hummed above cracked vinyl chairs. Luca found her beside her younger brother's room, her household pass gone, her suitcase resting against her ankle. She stiffened when his shadow crossed the pale floor. No guard stood behind him. No car blocked the exit. He stopped several feet away and placed the broken engagement seal on an empty chair. The person who poisoned me has been handed over, he said. The alliance is finished. Half my territory went with it. Elena's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. You didn't need me here to do what was right. No, Luca's voice carried none of the steel that once made rooms obey. I needed you gone before I understood what your presence had cost you. He did not reach for her bag. He did not order her home. Instead, before the cold clinic light and the open doorway through which she could still leave, Luca lowered his head. I offered you money when I owed you truth. I let my house punish you for saving my life. I am sorry, Elena. The hum of the lights filled the space between them. At last, Elena released the suitcase handle. If I return, I do not return as someone you can command into silence. Luca raised his eyes. Then name the terms under which you will walk through those gates. She studied the broken seal, then the man who had shattered his own throne rather than preserve the lie beneath it. Elena picked up her suitcase herself. Take me back, she said, and let everyone see whom you chose to apologize to. By the time their car reached the rain-dark iron gates, the entire household was waiting in the courtyard, and Elena had yet to decide whether crossing that threshold meant forgiveness, or merely the beginning of Luca earning it. Cold rain slipped from the courtyard arches, tapping against black umbrellas as the household stood in 2 rigid lines beneath the gray morning light. The iron gates groaned shut behind the car. Elena stepped onto the wet stone carrying her own suitcase, while Luca walked beside her without guards, without ceremony, and without asking permission to lead. The head housekeeper opened the council room doors. Inside, the air smelled of extinguished candles and polished mahogany. The same room where whispers had followed Elena's every movement, where Luca's political fiancé had once humiliated her before people who mistook silence for weakness. Mr. Bellini stood near the long table in his restored cook's coat. The guard who had accepted Elena's household pass lowered his gaze as she entered. No one spoke. Luca moved to the head of the table, but he did not take the chair. Instead, he pulled it away and left the place of power empty. "You asked them to witness whom I apologized to," he said. "They will witness what that apology costs." The head housekeeper placed a leather folder on the table. Luca opened it, removed 2 documents, and crossed the room until he stood before Elena. Then, before the household that had measured every person by rank, Luca Moretti went down on one knee. A breath caught somewhere near the doors. Rain hissed against the tall windows. Elena's fingers tightened around the worn suitcase handle, but she neither stepped back nor reached for him. Luca held out the first document. "This transfers ownership of the mansion to you," he said. The paper remained steady in his hand even as the old council chair stood vacant behind him. Not employment. Not permission to remain. Ownership. No one under this roof will ever again decide whether you deserve shelter. The second document bore the seal of an independent medical trust. Luca placed it above the first. "This establishes a permanent treatment fund in your name. Your brother's care is guaranteed, and the fund will serve household workers whose families cannot afford treatment. I cannot use it to control you. Neither can anyone who comes after me." Elena looked down at him. "And what do you receive in return? Nothing you do not freely give." The words landed more sharply than any command he had issued in that room. Luca turned his head toward the gathered household while remaining on one knee. "Mr. Bellini's name is cleared and his position protected. Elena's wages have been restored in full. But understand this above all. She is no longer a maid in my house, or a servant of anyone." The head housekeeper distributed copies of the signed protections. Mr. Bellini pressed a flour-roughened hand to his mouth. The guard removed Elena's old pass from his pocket and laid it on the table, the small card making a crisp sound against the wood. Elena finally released her suitcase. "Stand up, Luca." He did, but only after she accepted the documents. "A house cannot repay a life," she said. "A fund cannot erase what happened here." "I know." "Then these are not gifts that purchase forgiveness." No, her eyes remained fixed on his. "I will decide how this house is run. Every worker receives written protections. No one is punished without being heard. And my brother's care remains his right whether I stay or leave." Luca removed the signet ring that had once sealed every order in the mansion and placed it beside her old pass. "Agreed." Elena signed. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than the ring. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the windows silver with moisture and the halls strangely quiet. Elena did not return to the servants' wing. She entered Luca's room carrying no uniform and wearing no household pass. Firelight warmed the dark wood. Cedar smoke softened the medicinal scent that still clung faintly to the room. Luca sat against the headboard, leaving space beside him but making no gesture to claim it. Elena placed the ownership papers on the nightstand. "This does not mean you have finished earning my trust. I know. And if I stay tonight, it is because I choose to. I know that too." She lay beside him and rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat she had once fought through darkness to preserve. Her hand closed gently around his shirt, not from exhaustion, not from duty, but because no locked door stood between choice and safety anymore. Luca drew the blanket over her shoulders. He did not sleep. While the fire settled into red embers and her breathing grew slow against him, the man who had once ruled by keeping everyone awake remained perfectly still to guard the rest of the woman who had taught him to kneel. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.